The night was quiet, the kind of suburban calm that felt almost too perfect, like a movie scene right before something goes wrong. I had just finished reviewing a few reports from the precinct when I heard the sharp, deliberate knock at my door. It was 11:47 p.m. My instincts flared instantly. People don't knock on my door that late unless something's seriously wrong. My house sat near the edge of the Oak Ridge Estates community, a high-end neighborhood run by one of the most overreaching homeowners associations I'd ever encountered, and that's saying something. I'd been the chief of police in this city for 15 years. I'd seen everything from petty HOA feuds to full-blown fraud rings hiding behind neighborhood committees. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to face that night. When I looked through the peephole, I saw two men dressed in what appeared to be police uniforms. Dark navy, badges gleaming under the porch light, belts carrying the usual equipment, and one of them holding a clipboard. Their stance was official, but something about their posture screamed off. Real officers carry a certain confidence, a composure you can't fake. These men looked tense, rehearsed, like actors waiting for their cue. I didn't open the door right away. "Can I help you, officers?" I called out, keeping my voice calm. The taller one stepped forward. "Mr. Carter?" His tone had that fake authority some people use when they're not used to being in charge. "Yes," I replied. "We have an arrest warrant for you," he said. My eyebrows lifted slightly. "An arrest warrant? For what?" The second man stepped closer. "Violation of community bylaws. You've been reported by the Oak Ridge Estates HOA for repeated noncompliance and harassment of the board." I almost laughed. Harassment? Noncompliance? I could feel my pulse steady, not from fear but from irritation. "You're saying the HOA issued a warrant?" The taller man looked uncertain for a second, but quickly regained his composure. "Yes, sir. You'll need to come with us peacefully, or we'll have to escalate this matter." I leaned against the doorframe, my hand resting near my concealed weapon out of habit, not threat. "You boys sure you're with the police department?" I asked, my voice lowering into the tone I usually used when questioning suspects. "Because I happen to know the chief personally." They exchanged glances. The second one said, "Sir, we don't have to prove anything to you." "Step outside," I smiled faintly. "That's interesting," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my wallet. I flipped it open, revealing my badge, the genuine polished emblem of the city's chief of police. "Because you're looking at him." For a split second, the taller man froze. His hand twitched slightly and I saw his confidence crumble. "What, chief?" he stammered, but before I could respond, both of them turned on their heels and started walking away, fast. I stepped out onto the porch, my voice booming through the night air. "Stop right there!" My command carried the weight of years of authority. They paused briefly, but then broke into a sprint, running down my driveway toward a black SUV parked under the streetlight. I pulled my phone out and called dispatch. "This is Chief Carter. I've got 2 individuals impersonating officers attempting an unlawful arrest at my residence. Send units to Oak Ridge Estates immediately." Within minutes, sirens echoed in the distance. I stood there watching the SUV speed off, tires screeching as it took a sharp turn out of the neighborhood. My mind raced, not from fear but from controlled fury. The HOA had been on my nerves for months, ever since I refused to comply with their absurd demand to repaint my fence a more community-appropriate beige. They'd fined me, sent threatening letters, and even tried to tow my department-issued vehicle once, claiming it was commercial use. But sending fake cops to arrest me? That was a new level of insanity. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and sat down at my desk. My security cameras had caught everything: the fake uniforms, the SUV's license plate, even the moment they panicked when they realized who I was. I replayed the footage twice, noting every detail, every facial expression. This wasn't just a prank or intimidation tactic. This was a calculated operation. They'd come prepared with fake badges, fake papers, and coordinated cover stories, which meant someone with resources and a serious grudge was behind it. The next morning, I arrived at the precinct before sunrise. My team was already reviewing the footage I'd sent in. Detective Ramos, one of my best men, shook his head. "Chief, these guys weren't amateurs. The uniforms look authentic, right down to the stitching. Whoever made them had access to legit materials." "And the SUV?" I asked. "Registered to a shell company," he replied. "No known owner, no listed address. We're tracing it through the state database, but it looks like a rental under a fake identity." I nodded, my jaw tightening. Start pulling every HOA board member's financials. I want to know if anyone's been making strange payments, especially to private contractors. Ramos raised an eyebrow. You think the HOA's involved? I gave him a sharp look. I know they are. Oak Ridge Estates wasn't your average suburban community. The HOA there operated like a small government, with mandatory fees, private enforcers, and strict bylaws that bordered on tyrannical. Residents had complained for years about the leadership, particularly the president, Karen Wilcox, a woman whose thirst for control could rival a dictator's. She'd once fined a family for planting tulips out of color coordination with the rest of the neighborhood. I'd let most of their nonsense slide because technically they operated within their charter's legal limits. But this? Impersonating law enforcement crossed a federal line. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing documents, cross-referencing names, and connecting dots that didn't want to be connected. By noon, I had one thing clear in my mind. Someone in that HOA had gone rogue, and they thought they could scare me into compliance. They'd made a grave mistake. That evening, as I drove back home, I noticed something strange. The same black SUV from last night was parked a few houses down, half hidden behind a row of hedges. Its engine was off, but I could see a faint glow from inside, someone watching, waiting. I parked my cruiser at the end of the driveway, got out slowly, and walked toward my front door. My instincts were screaming, but I didn't show it. If they wanted to show, I'd give them one. I went inside, turned off the porch light, and sat by the window, watching the shadows outside. My phone buzzed, an anonymous text message. Drop the complaint or next time we won't just knock. I stared at the message for a long moment, my jaw set. They wanted to play games with me? Fine. They'd soon learn that when you target the chief of police, you don't get to walk away unscathed. You get exposed. The next morning, I was already in my office by 6. Sleep had barely touched me, and the adrenaline from the previous night hadn't faded. The message on my phone, drop the complaint, or next time we won't just knock, kept replaying in my head like a broken record. That kind of threat wasn't amateur intimidation anymore. It was escalation. Whoever these people were, they believed they had power. And worse, they believed I was vulnerable. They couldn't have been more wrong. I started my day by locking down my home security system even tighter. My entire property was already covered by 12 high-definition cameras, but I added 3 more overnight using spare equipment from the department. I wanted full visual coverage, every street, every angle, every car that came within 50 feet of my house. Then I called in my deputy, Lieutenant Sarah Jennings, a woman I trusted more than anyone else in the force. When she arrived, I briefed her in detail, showing her the footage and the message. Her expression hardened. "Chief, these guys aren't random crooks," she said, leaning closer to the monitor. "They had tactical awareness, coordination, and decent uniforms. This feels organized, almost paramilitary." I nodded. "And whoever's funding them is using the HOA as cover." The board president, Karen Wilcox, has had it out for me since the first time I told her the city wouldn't enforce her ridiculous HOA parking rules. She's petty enough to orchestrate something like this, but she wouldn't be able to pull off fake cops without help. I want a full background check on every HOA board member, every vendor they've contracted, and every private security outfit they've ever used. Jennings nodded and got to work immediately. By mid-afternoon, the reports began trickling in. The HOA's financial records were a mess. Multiple maintenance payments to shell companies, missing invoices, and unauthorized withdrawals from the community fund. But what caught my attention was one name that appeared repeatedly: Blue Ridge Enforcement Services. The company didn't exist in any state registry, yet the HOA had paid them over $28,000 in the last 2 months for neighborhood compliance and enforcement training. That was my first real lead. I called Ramos into my office. "Blue Ridge Enforcement Services," I said, sliding the printed statement across my desk. "Find out who's behind it." He took one look and nodded. "On it, Chief." As he left, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know what this meant. Someone was laundering money, probably to fund these fake officers. But why go after me? The answer hit me like a flash. The week before, I'd authorized an internal audit of several community associations after a resident's complaint led to the discovery of embezzlement in another neighborhood. If Oak Ridge Estates was next on that list and Karen Wilcox knew it, then she had every reason to panic. My investigation could expose her and whoever was helping her siphon funds from the residents. The fake arrest was a desperate attempt to intimidate me into silence. Unfortunately for her, she'd chosen the wrong target. That evening, I went undercover. Not officially, just off the record. I attended the HOA's monthly community meeting, held in their over-decorated clubhouse, pretending to be just another concerned resident. I wore plain clothes, a baseball cap, and sat in the back row. The turnout was small, maybe 15 people, but the board sat up front behind a long table, smug and self-important. Karen Wilcox, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was at the center. She was in her late 50s, sharp blonde bob, pearl necklace, and an expression that said she thought she was untouchable. "We'll now discuss the ongoing issue of property compliance," she announced, her tone dripping with authority. "Some residents believe they are above community rules. We've taken steps to ensure compliance is enforced." Her eyes briefly scanned the room, and for a split second, I could swear they lingered on me. I kept my expression neutral, jotting notes on my phone as she continued. "We've also partnered with a private agency to handle any escalations that local authorities refuse to address." That was my confirmation. Blue Ridge Enforcement Services. She'd just admitted it in front of the entire room, dressed up in vague legal language. I raised my hand casually. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone polite. "What private agency are you referring to?" She froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled thinly. "That's internal board business, sir. You're not on the compliance committee." "Just curious," I replied, "because I happen to know the city doesn't authorize any third-party enforcement unless approved by law enforcement." Her mask cracked slightly. "We don't need police approval to keep our community safe." I smiled faintly. "Interesting," I said, leaning back, "because the law might disagree." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several residents turned toward her, whispering. She quickly moved to change the subject, but the tension in the room was palpable. After the meeting ended, I waited until most of the residents had left before approaching her. "Karen," I said quietly, stepping up to her table, "we need to talk." She looked up, annoyance flickering across her face. "Oh, it's you, the fence man. If you're here to argue again, save it," I interrupted. "Two men showed up at my house last night dressed as police officers. They claimed the HOA issued a warrant for my arrest. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Her face went pale. "That's ridiculous," she stammered. "The HOA doesn't have that kind of authority." "You're right," I said coldly. "Which is why I find it fascinating that your HOA payments have been funding a fake law enforcement agency." She froze completely. I don't know what you're talking about." "You will," I said, turning to leave. "Because I'm opening a full investigation. And if I find out you're behind this, you won't be attending HOA meetings. You'll be attending court hearings." I left her standing there, shaking, and by the time I got home, I knew she'd start making phone calls. People like her always do when they realize the walls are closing in. Sure enough, an hour later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a deep, gravelly voice said, "Chief Carter, you should have left things alone." I recognized the tone immediately, calculated, confident, the kind that comes from someone used to making threats. "Who is this?" I asked. "Someone who can make your problems disappear," the voice replied. "Walk away from this investigation and we'll consider last night a misunderstanding." "And if I don't?" I asked, letting my silence stretch. "Then we stop asking nicely." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, every instinct in me sharpening. This wasn't just an HOA squabble anymore. This was organized crime, hidden under the guise of neighborhood civility. I opened my secure laptop and began typing my report, marking it top priority, potential criminal conspiracy. The HOA thought they were playing with bureaucracy. They didn't realize they'd declared war on the city's chief of police. And I was done playing nice. By sunrise the next day, my house looked less like a suburban home and more like an undercover command post. My phone buzzed nonstop. Jennings had been pulling every string she could to trace Blue Ridge Enforcement Services, while Ramos was coordinating with cybercrime to follow the digital money trail. I sat at my desk, running through the data we'd gathered overnight. The evidence was mounting like a tidal wave. The HOA's payments to Blue Ridge had been funneled through 3 dummy companies, all created within the last 6 months. The money eventually landed in an offshore account linked to a man named Victor Crane, a former private security contractor dishonorably discharged for impersonating military personnel during a domestic operation. Crane's reputation was notorious in underground circles. He ran compliance teams for private clients who wanted to intimidate people under the cover of legality. Karen Wilcox and her cronies had hired a criminal. They hadn't just broken HOA law, they'd crossed into felony territory, conspiracy, impersonation of law enforcement, and potentially racketeering. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The pieces were aligning perfectly, but one thing still bothered me: the text message. "Drop the complaint or next time we won't just knock." That wasn't written by someone like Karen. Her threats were passive-aggressive, full of self-righteous phrasing. This was professional intimidation. It meant Crane himself was involved personally. That realization made my blood run cold. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. By mid-morning, Jennings came rushing in, holding a folder. "Chief, we got a hit," she said. Blue Ridge Enforcement filed a security contract with the HOA last month, under a fake city permit. They claimed to be authorized to assist with community law enforcement duties. It's completely fraudulent, but it looks official. They even forged your signature. I took the papers and examined them closely. The signature was a perfect copy of mine, down to the stroke angle. "They're bold," I muttered. "And stupid." I grabbed my jacket. "We're going to the HOA office. Get Ramos and a couple uniforms. If Karen thinks she can hide behind fake paperwork, it's time she sees what real authority looks like." When we pulled up to the HOA administrative building, a small fancy office at the edge of the community, several residents were milling about, arguing with the receptionist. Apparently word had spread about the fake police incident, and everyone wanted answers. Karen was inside, seated at her desk, visibly anxious but trying to maintain composure. As soon as I entered, the color drained from her face. "Chief Carter," she said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." "Cut the act, Karen," I said coldly, tossing the forged contract onto her desk. "You forged my signature on a city enforcement authorization." She stared at it, feigning confusion. I don't know what that is." Ramos stepped forward, his tone sharp. "It's your HOA's paperwork, Mrs. Wilcox. We traced it through your office computer." She froze, her eyes darting to her assistant, who immediately looked away. "We also found financial transfers between your HOA fund and a company linked to a known felon, Victor Crane," I added. "Would you like to explain why community money is being wired to a man under federal investigation?" Karen's mask finally cracked. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "I didn't know he was a criminal. They told me Blue Ridge was legitimate." I leaned forward. "And you believed that a neighborhood association could hire its own enforcement team with badges and arrest powers?" She faltered. "I just wanted order. People weren't following the rules. The neighborhood was falling apart, and so you thought you'd create your own police force?" I interrupted. "You realize that's impersonation of law enforcement. A felony." Tears welled in her eyes, but before she could respond, my radio crackled. Jennings' voice came through. "Chief, we've got movement. 2 SUVs just left a warehouse registered to Blue Ridge Enforcement, heading toward your location." My stomach tightened. "Copy that," I replied, turning to Ramos. "Get everyone outside now." We rushed into the parking lot just as 2 matte black SUVs came screeching around the corner. The vehicles stopped abruptly, and 6 men in tactical gear stepped out wearing fake badges and ballistic vests. Their weapons weren't drawn, but they were visible. One of them, tall, with a shaved head and a scar over his left brow, stepped forward. I recognized him instantly from the personnel files. Victor Crane. "Chief Carter," he called out, his tone smooth but laced with mock respect. "I think we have some unfinished business." I stepped forward calmly, my badge visible on my belt. "You're impersonating law enforcement, Crane. Drop the act before you dig yourself deeper." He smirked. Funny coming from a man whose HOA is begging for order. "We were hired to keep peace. Maybe you should thank us." "Peace?" I snapped. "You broke into my property, threatened me, and forged official documents. That's not peace, that's organized crime." Ramos and Jennings flanked me, hands resting on their holsters. Residents nearby began recording with their phones. Crane's smirk faltered slightly. "You really want to make this public, Chief?" he asked. You know how fast things can go bad when guns are out. I stared him down, not blinking. Try me. For a moment, the air was electric, like a fuse about to blow. Then, from behind us, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. I'd called for backup before we left the station, just in case. Within seconds, 3 squad cars arrived, blocking both exits of the parking lot. Real officers stepped out, weapons ready but disciplined. Crane's men looked uncertain now. One muttered something under his breath, and another started inching back toward the SUV. End of the line, I said quietly. Drop your gear. Crane's expression hardened. You think this ends with me? He hissed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I don't care, I said flatly. You're under arrest. With that, Ramos gave the order and my officers moved in. The fake enforcers were quickly disarmed and cuffed. Crane resisted for a moment, but one swift takedown later, he was on the ground, face pressed against the asphalt. As they loaded him into a cruiser, I turned back to Karen, who was standing on the sidewalk, trembling. You're coming too, I said. We'll sort your charges at the station. She didn't argue. She just nodded weakly, muttering something about not meaning for it to go this far. Back at the precinct, the interrogation room felt colder than usual. I sat across from Crane, his wrists chained to the table. He was calm, too calm. You really think locking me up fixes anything? He said. You've just made enemies you can't see. I deal with criminals every day, I replied. You're no different, he laughed softly. You think Karen hired me? She's just a pawn. There's someone bigger funding these community enforcement programs all over the state. You shut one down, 10 more pop up. I leaned forward. Then I'll keep shutting them down. He grinned. You won't live long enough. For the first time that day, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Not fear, but recognition. This wasn't just an HOA scandal anymore. It was a statewide network, possibly a front for laundering and intimidation under the cover of neighborhood safety. I stood, signaling for the guards to take him away. We'll see who's still standing when the dust settles, I said quietly. As Crane was escorted out, Jennings entered the room holding a new folder. Chief, she said gravely, we found something in Crane's phone. A contact named Director H. Looks like your name's already on their list. I stared at the document, the realization sinking in. I wasn't just fighting one corrupt HOA anymore. I was at war with a system hiding behind them. And if they thought last night's fake arrest would scare me, they were about to learn how dangerous a cornered cop could be. The storm hit the following week, not rain or thunder, but the kind that shakes institutions. What began as a simple act of HOA arrogance had unraveled into a criminal conspiracy that spread far beyond the fences of Oak Ridge Estates. Every lead we pulled revealed another thread of corruption. Shell companies, falsified permits, and fake enforcement agencies operating across multiple counties. It was organized, deliberate, and frighteningly efficient. Each group disguised itself as a community compliance service, hired by HOAs desperate to control their residents. The mastermind behind all of it, the mysterious Director H, had managed to stay hidden, operating through layers of intermediaries. But that was about to change. I wasn't about to let anyone threaten me, my officers, or my city. For days, my team and I worked around the clock. Jennings coordinated with state and federal agencies, while Ramos dug into the financials. We traced dozens of payments flowing from HOAs in different towns to offshore accounts that all led to the same corporation, Havenstone Property Management, headquartered in Denver. On paper, they were a legitimate management company providing community governance services. In reality, they were laundering millions through fake enforcement contracts, using groups like Blue Ridge as their muscle. The man behind it all? Henry Wallace, former city councilman turned corporate executive. He'd once proposed a controversial law that would allow HOAs to form independent security divisions. The law failed, but he'd built his empire anyway, illegally. Now his network was being dismantled, one arrest at a time. We coordinated a sting operation in collaboration with the state police and the FBI. It was delicate work. We couldn't just storm Havenstone's offices without concrete evidence, so we baited them instead. Using encrypted communications recovered from Crane's phone, we posed as the HOA representatives looking to expand Blue Ridge's operations. The message was clear. We're ready to move forward, but the chief of police is a problem. We need him handled. Within 24 hours, we had a response, an invitation to a confidential negotiation at a private airfield outside the city. That was all the confirmation we needed. The night of the operation, the air was sharp with tension. I was suited up in tactical gear, surrounded by a task force of officers and federal agents. The plan was simple: record, confirm, and arrest. I wasn't supposed to be in the field. It was risky, given that I was the bait, but I refused to sit behind a desk while others took the danger I'd drawn toward myself. As we arrived at the airfield, floodlights bathed the asphalt in a cold glow. A private jet sat on the tarmac, its engines idling. 3 SUVs pulled up beside it, and a group of men in suits stepped out. At the center was Henry Wallace, tall, silver-haired, and exuding the smug arrogance of a man who thought he owned everyone in sight. He carried a briefcase and spoke into an earpiece as his men scanned the perimeter. Jennings' voice crackled in my earpiece. "All units in position, awaiting confirmation." I took a deep breath, stepped out from the shadows, and started walking toward Wallace. His head turned slightly, confusion flickering across his face before recognition set in. "Chief Carter," he said, feigning surprise. "You're early." "I don't recall being invited," I replied. "But I thought I'd drop by before your flight. You seem to be in a hurry." His lips curled into a condescending smile. "You've caused quite a mess for me, Chief. All I wanted was to bring order to communities too chaotic for local police to manage." "Order?" I snapped. "You mean fear, extortion, fraud. You created fake officers to terrorize homeowners into submission." He shrugged casually. "Fear and order are often the same thing. You of all people should know that." I took another step closer. "You forged warrants, threatened civilians, and tried to have me silenced. That ends tonight." Wallace sighed as if bored.
Do you have any idea how naive you sound?
"You can't stop this. There are dozens of organizations like mine, legally structured, politically protected. You take me down and another will rise tomorrow. This country runs on control, Chief. I just learned how to sell it better than anyone else." He turned to his men. "Handle him!" The moment the words left his mouth, his bodyguards reached inside their jackets. But before they could pull anything, floodlights exploded from all directions, and a dozen armed officers emerged, shouting commands. "Police, drop your weapons!" The men froze, stunned. Wallace's calm composure evaporated as agents surrounded him, forcing him to the ground. Jennings approached, reading him his rights while Ramos secured the briefcase. Inside the case were contracts, hundreds of them, linking Wallace to dozens of HOAs across the state. The smoking gun. As Wallace was led away, he turned his head toward me, sneering. "You think you've won, Carter? I've spent years building this. You'll never clean up the system. You'll just be mopping up the pieces." I stepped closer, meeting his glare. "Maybe, but I'll start with yours." He didn't speak again. The aftermath was chaos. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. HOA members across the country began demanding audits, and Havenstone's operations collapsed overnight. Federal prosecutors launched an investigation into Wallace's political ties, uncovering a tangled web of corruption that reached deep into city councils and state offices. Karen Wilcox, meanwhile, turned state witness, trading testimony for a reduced sentence. Her confession was damning. She revealed that Wallace's company approached problem HOAs, offering them compliance solutions to deal with difficult residents. She'd been promised prestige, control, and a cut of the profits if she helped expand the program. It was greed disguised as order, but victory didn't come without scars. For weeks, I received veiled threats, anonymous calls, letters, even a drone hovering near my backyard one night. Someone was still out there cleaning up Wallace's mess. Jennings insisted I stay under protection, but I refused. I wasn't the type to hide behind walls. I'd faced worse in my years on the force. I knew the system would always breed new villains, but as long as I wore the badge, they'd have to crawl through me first. One evening, as I sat in my office finishing paperwork, Ramos walked in holding a sealed envelope. "Came in through the mail drop," he said, setting it on my desk. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single card, embossed with a silver crest that read, "Community Enforcement Initiative, Phase 2. Below it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "You stopped one. Let's see if you can stop the rest." I stared at it for a long time, the room silent except for the hum of the lights. Jennings looked uneasy. "You think it's legit?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Oh, it's real." Wallace wasn't lying, there's more out there. But now they know I'm watching. I placed the card in an evidence bag and stood, looking out the window at the city light stretching toward the horizon. People often assume law enforcement is about power, but it isn't. It's about responsibility, the weight of knowing that even when the fight never ends, you keep showing up. The HOA tried to intimidate me. Wallace tried to silence me. And somewhere out there, more people just like them were waiting in the shadows, thinking they could twist the law for profit. But I had news for them. You don't scare the chief of police. You motivate him. As the night deepened, I switched off the lights, locking the office behind me. The storm had passed for now, but I could already feel the next one building somewhere beyond the horizon. The city was quiet, but the quiet never lasted. Somewhere, another director was drawing up plans, and when they came for me or anyone under my watch, they'd find I was ready. Because in Oak Ridge Estates, the HOA learned the hard way. When you send fake officers to arrest the chief of police, you don't just lose your power, you lose your empire. And I was just getting started.